the trade show just doesn't work. And it's not just the outdoor industry. You're seeing this disruption everywhere, right? CES had like some of the worst numbers they've ever seen. I went to CES this time around and was like, wow, this is a ghost town. In any business decision, you have to measure like, okay, what is my cost and what's my ROI? Well, these shows have grown in scope, so their costs have gone up, but the value has not kept up.
Welcome to the Backcountry Marketing Podcast. Today, I'm sitting down with Yoon Kim. He is the founder of the Outdoor Media Summit, as well as the founder of Outdoor Ecom, a digital agency in the industry. Yoon, good morning. How are you?
I'm doing good. How's it going?
Fantastic. It's good to see you.
Same. Very excited.
Well, you've got a lot on your plate. We're about a month out from Outdoor Media Summit kicking off here. I'm sure you're running around trying to get all the last minute details put together, but how goes the countdown?
Yeah, there's in the event world, there's a concept they call the calm before the storm. Starting from the 12-week window to the 4-week window, that's when like all the prep happens. Once that 4-week window hits, it's like, well, there's not really much you can do at that point. So I'm at that point, and I'm just kind of twiddling my thumbs and waiting for things to happen.
When did you first realize you were in the business of event planning? Because you started as a marketer in the agency world, but when did you realize, oh, I also am an event organizer?
It started when I was in high school. My folks went on vacation, and they took my brother and sister, and they left the house for a few weeks. And I was like, cool, I'm going to throw a house party. This is a different Yoon. We got like 4 kegs and, invited all our friends. And we had like several hundred people show up at the house. And then we did that a couple times while they were on vacation. And they came back and, we cleaned up the house. But my sister found one of the kegs in my room. And she told my dad, and she's like, what is this? And so my dad came up there and he sat me down on the bed. And he's like, son, we need to have a talk. And he's like, you disappoint me. What are you doing with your life? And I broke down crying. I was like, Dad, that's the only thing I'm good at is partying. I mean, Outdoor Media Summit is in some way just a, very extravagantly planned. It's not a party, it's a conference, but it's the same thing. It's like, kind of figuring out the details and that kind of, all that kind of stuff. So yeah, I guess in some way in high school.
That's what started it all.
Yep.
Amazing.
Yep.
Well, we're talking about the future of outdoor events on this episode, and we figured who better to talk to than someone who is behind the scenes throwing his very own event. I'm excited to kind of dig into this. I feel like the industry, at least the last year, well, really the last 3 years, has been asking a lot of questions about what is the future of our events. What does that look like moving forwards? And you've got a lot of interesting insight and questions of your own about this topic. And so I'm excited to dig in and kind of pick your brain about this idea. I'd love, though, before we jump into that, if you could kind of back up, maybe not quite to high school, but could you kind of give us the origin story of Outdoor Ecom, what you do, and then how Outdoor Media Summit was kind of born from that or through that?
Yeah. The origin story of how Outdoor Ecom was born. Let me start.
Yeah.
There.
What do you guys do? Because the business has evolved considerably since day one.
Yeah. So we started Outdoor Ecom in 2000. I think officially our paperwork says like 2011 or something like this when we got our EIN, maybe 2010. Pretty early on. And the company was originally called Blogs for Brands. And Blogs for Brands, literally we would install a WordPress blog on the brand's website, and then we would run the content. So I'd hire a team of writers, and we would like operate the content on, brandname.com/blog. So that's kind of how we started. But what really happened was, so I started my career in finance at JP Morgan, and this is like 2005 to 2008. And during that time, this is kind of the build up to the financial crisis. And so I'd kind of been like on the ground of all that stuff, and I was like, man, this is a really slimy industry that I don't want to be a part of. So at one point I did some soul searching, and I was like, what industry do I want to be a part of that like lines up with my values? The outdoor industry that like it makes less money, but I don't care. Like I can go to bed at night and feel good about what I'm doing. So realized like, okay, blog marketing is a thing, SEO is a thing. Landed my first client, and then the concept worked, and so then I tried it on the next client, and it worked, and that's kind of the beginning story of how I started Outdoor Ecom.
Gotcha. And what does it look like today? What do you, because you're no longer operating in the blog space.
Yeah, right. Yeah, that kind of thing doesn't fly anymore. Um, but so we have a team of 5 full timers, and I'm kind of involved. I mean, I'm, very much on the like relationship side of things and kind of the sales side of things. The team operates it like it's their own business. It's very much this like hands off. I don't want to micromanage. I just let the team do their thing, and like, they kick ass at what they do. I mean, they're freaking good at what they do. So
And when did you realize that you wanted to create an event? And what is the Outdoor Media Summit today? What does it represent?
so there's a guy named Christian Beckwith, and I can look back and thank him for kind of like, bending my ear and, convincing me. So he had a conference called Shift in Jackson Hole, which was a land managers slash like conservation agency style. Like that was his audience, and he would talk about like issues in that kind of space. And he needed more media at the conference, so he had heard of me because through Blogs for Brands, like we don't do PR. That's something that I intentionally do not touch. But I do hire a lot of writers I did for Blogs for Brands. We had a team of like 100 writers or like dozens of writers at the time. Some of the best freelancers in the outdoor industry, including people like Sean McCoy was writing for me, Craig Becker was writing for me. I mean, like we were a kick-ass team. Anyway, he was like, "Hey, I know you work with all these writers and all this media." Or he said, like, "How do you get this media to Shift? I want to bring people to Shift." And I was like, "Well, that's easy. Just throw a separate event at the same time, and have them have like, co-located content." And he's like, "Great, you want to do it?" And I was like, "Man, heck no, it sounds like so much work. I don't want to do that." And he's like, "Well, I'll give you some money." And I was like, "No, I'm not gonna do it." Well, he just was pretty persistent about it, and over the course of months, he was like, "Okay, I actually do have some money. Like we can, pay for the whole thing." And I was like, "I'll expense a trip to Jackson Hole. It's hard to turn down." So I ended up doing it. So the first year was just 40. It was like 39 people, a bunch of bloggers. REI was the sponsor for the first year, and Patagonia was the sponsor for the first year. And it was just like a bunch of, like my buds in media, like the people that were writing with me for Blogs for Brands. And then we got together. There wasn't really much of a structure. It wasn't like, breakout sessions on the hour and like super organized. We just kind of got together. At the time, bloggers, we were not making money. Like we were dirt bagging it and, like barely getting by. But we were doing something cool. We were driving tons of traffic. We were gaming these algorithms. So we just got together in a room and we're like, all right, let's share secrets. What are you doing on social? Like, oh, cool. Now you can like, promote content on Facebook. Oh, sweet. How are you gaming the the search algorithm? And so we did for 2.5 days is just share secrets. And that's kind of the spirit of the event today is, we're an education conference. There's more structure to it, obviously. But first and foremost, we're an education conference where the brightest minds in marketing in-house at brands and the brightest journalists in the media, we get together for 2.5 days and we share our secrets. Like, hey, what's working, what's not working, that sort of thing. So that's kind of where it started from, was 2014. All thanks to Christian Beckwith. Yeah. And a lot of other people, but he was the main ringleader.
Gotcha. Well, it's definitely been an event that's been on my radar the last couple of years. I feel like is when I first became aware of it, and it seems like a really pretty cool thing. I know actually a number of our guests who have been on this show have attended and are speaking and have breakout sessions. So it seems like an awesome way to kind of continue the education with our industry and taking it to the next level. I'm curious if you could kind of give us your view of the outdoor industry when it relates to events. What are some of the questions that are out there these days? What are people wondering about the future of events?
It's almost this mood or vibe, or I don't know what you want to call it, but it's kind of a sentiment of wanting to relive the glory days, and almost it's like a mix between a little bit of frustration and despair of like, man, we used to have this great gathering place, and like we don't know where it is anymore.
Well, you mentioned that people are frustrated and there's this sense of despair. Why is that?
Well, I think there used to be this sense of community of like, hey, this is where I belong. And I feel like that's just something that is, every person in their soul, they want to have that sense of community and belonging. And I mean, I know just personally for myself, like I've, growing up, I never really belonged anywhere. And that feeling of not really like, okay, not really having a place or your people, it's not a good feeling. And I think we're kind of in this transition period where people are not actually sure, which pocket they belong into. I do see in the future, though, it's going to be like there will be kind of, more established, like, these up and coming places are going to be a little bit more established. And then there will be little pockets where people gather versus this like giant umbrella where everyone gathers. I don't, and this is my thoughts and my experience. And, I've been mentored by, in my opinion, some of the best I've been like super lucky to be mentored by like Kenji and Lance and, Sutton and like just people who like really have spent tons and tons of time in events, Greg Thompson, and, they've just kind of like, dumped their knowledge onto me of like, hey, this is how, we, like, this is all of our experience in events. So I'm a very newcomer to the event scene. I do have maybe, close to 10 years of experience, but these guys have decades of experience, and they grew shows that are much bigger than Outdoor Media Summit. Like we're very small potatoes. So this is just kind of like me piecing it together, but I don't see this like umbrella gathering like you'll see in like, SHOT Show or like, ICAST. I do see a big gathering, like thousands or tens of thousands or maybe even hundreds of thousands will gather, but it's not going to look the same. It's going to be in the form of a consumer event. So you look at Sea Otter, right? When Interbike went away, the other side of that disruption. And so what I see is like this disruption, right? So the trade show is disrupted, and then what's on the other side of that disruption? It's consumer events, it's regional, kind of hyper niche events, and then like conferences, which is like us. So like Interbike went away, and then you see Sea Otter, grew. You see like, BLC, which is the conference, and then they kind of have these like hyper niche, kind of regional events that are kind of sales based. And that's my understanding. And I kind of see that happening in the outdoor industry too. So in that sense, you could say like the bike industry is a little ahead. The trade show just doesn't work. And it's not just the outdoor industry. You're seeing this disruption everywhere, right? You go to the houseware show or the hardware show, or you go to even CES. Like CES had like some of the worst numbers they've ever seen. I went to CES this time around and was like, wow, this is a ghost town.
How come? Why are trade shows across the board struggling?
I think it all comes back down to the customer. The customer at the end of the day is the brand. Like the customer is who foots the bill, right? So in this case, the brand is the one footing the bill. Well, trade shows have like grown in scope. They've grown and grown and grown and grown and grown. And the brand is stuck with a bigger and bigger and bigger bill, but their value is not. It's a very simple equation. It's like, in any business decision, you have to measure like, okay, what is my cost and what's my ROI? Well, these shows have grown in scope, so their costs have gone up, but the value has not kept up. Actually, in some ways, the value may have gone down. So it's just a matter of time before they're looking at their, budgets and being like, man, they're thinking about it over years. Man, is this really having an ROI? It's not. And then one day COVID hits and they're like, okay, we got to do something different. We're losing money on this. Is not a, proposition. I get that we're investing in this community, but we have been like bleeding for whatever it is, 5 years, making having negative returns. And so to me, it's a very simple calculation. The customer is not getting an ROI on their product, on their investment. Anyway, I mean, you kind of see the other side of the disruption where like, consumer events are relatively low cost, or like, conferences are again, low cost. The return is very, very, very high. And these niche, buying events or like local, these more regional type events, the cost is very low. The return is relatively high.
So that's something that I've asked a number of folks who have been on this show where I've meeting up with them at shows, and specifically in the bike industry at a lot of consumer events, a lot of races. Like I always ask folks, like, how do you define success of being here and setting up a tent and bringing employees and bringing bikes and demo bikes and new product? And there's no one answer. Everyone kind of has a jumbled answer of, well, it's important for us to support the industry, or we got to show face, or we have to, this is a good opportunity to, network with distributors and sales. Was there ever a time that people could quantify succinctly the value of an event?
I've talked to some brands that have like some kind of formula for how they measure success. So I know at least for some brands, they are intentional about like trying to measure the return, and the return can be in different ways. It doesn't necessarily have to be a monetary return. It could be like number of high quality meetings with press, or like number of high quality meetings with buyers, or like reorders, something like that, right? It could be this kind of little bit more of a nebulous figure.
Well, it just seems like, yeah, it's a very interesting time. And the trade show is an interesting spot because the reason why people originally started going to trade shows, like that has started to change. Like people aren't buying the same ways that they used to. There's, as you mentioned on our intro call, like there are some industries that are still buying kind of the old school way, but moving forwards, like that seems to be less and less, which then begs the question, well, what is the value of a trade show? Obviously, one of the big events in our industry is OR, and they've been going through a lot of change recently. In fact, I was just reading an article where they've announced a new format where I think it's the first 2 days, the first couple hours of the day are just limited to buyers. Well, then the rest of the day is open to everyone else. And then the third day is open to everyone as well. Why do you see that change happening?
Yeah, I'm super excited about that. I really do think that, industries that have this kind of like central communal, you know, it could be a physical gathering or some kind of membership based gathering or whatever it is. But like, I'm rooting for OR, like not just from my own personal experience of like, being part of the heyday, but it just, everyone benefits when there's a strong core, and they've got it there. It sounds like they're starting to do the reevaluation of like, hey, how do we deliver value to our customer in a way that like makes sense for them to do this again. Kind of what you mentioned about the other industries, right? So you see these other industries where the trade show is actually thriving, it's growing. So I went to SHOT Show, earlier this year, and I'm like, oh my gosh, this place is packed. Like this is the most packed that I've seen it in like the last 7 or 8 shows that I've been to. I think they said they had 130K attendees. I mean, the place is just humongous. And then I went to ICAST, and similar thing. It's like, I think their footprint has shrunk, but it's more concentrated, so it feels lively. And kind of the differences in that world versus, well, actually, let me take a step back. So going back to that article, it talks about like how we got to where we are today, which is, before the internet, like deals were made, done in person. They were mostly done through reps. There wasn't a lot of this like kind of in-house sales. That period kind of started transitioning in the late 90s, early 2000s. But everything was still done on paper, and then the introduction of the internet. So shows changed from being this order writing thing to this marketing thing, and that was even in the early 2000s it was this marketing thing, and that's when you saw these booths like get Double Decker, and brands were going like bigger and louder with kind of their booth. Well, starting early 2010s, maybe you could say brands are starting to question the value. Like, hey, we're not getting a return on this. Why are we spending $250,000 on our booth build? $500,000 to send all of our employees. And then COVID hit, and then that's when people were like, okay, we need to reevaluate. This is not working anymore. But then you look at these other industries, right? So you look at like, shot and sport fishing, and my kind of theory on why those shows are, still thriving and growing, whereas other shows are shrinking, is because of the way that the retailer does business. So, in the firearms world, the retailer or the end consumer does not buy, their gun online. If they do, they still have to go into a FFL licensed dealer and go pick it up. So that world is still centered around brick and mortar. And then, those retailers are not accustomed to making all their purchases online. They're still accustomed to meeting someone in person and, touching and feeling and then writing an order. Similar in it's a little bit different situation of what I see in ICAST in Florida, which is, that's, to me, it's more of a regional event. So, if you ever go to like a touristy town in Florida, like every 5th shop is a surf shop or, some kind of, Bob's bait shop or something like that. And ICAST is made up of like dozens, if not hundreds, of those mom and pop small retailers that make the show feel lively. They're all wearing buyer badges. They all do legitimately, make $10,000 to $20,000 worth of order. They may do $250,000 or $500,000 in revenue total for the year, but they're still making orders and they're doing it on paper. They're not, doing everything online. Whereas in our space, the retailer has become accustomed to ordering online. And part of that is because their consumer orders online. So they've had to invest in the e-commerce game and learn that system. Well, once you learn that, that kind of e-commerce game and you know how to do things online, it's like, well, why do I need to travel the 2 busiest days of the year when I can just do this all online? And that's what happens, in the hardware industry and, in the houseware industry is that value has gone away. So anyway, that's kind of going back to your question of like, why do I think, some trade shows are thriving and some are not? That's those are 2 examples of like why those 2. I'm sure there's other reasons. That's just, the best that I can come up with, but it has been on my mind of like, when I went to those shows, I was like, why are these places, really doing well? And those are the best reasons I could come up with.
So does that mean as more and more, I'm assuming more and more buying and selling will be done online? Doesn't seem like that's going to go away. Does that mean that the future of these shows will start to change as well, and everyone is going to have to start to question what's our format, what is our value, and start to pivot as we're starting to see in some industries?
There's still value in like gathering. So for example, we built this. So the first thing at Outdoor Media Summit is a thing called New Gear Speed Date. It's an invite-only event to an invite-only show. But that format is, we invite gear reviewers, specifically gear review media, and then we have like 24 of the best brands showcasing. It's just like a product showcase event. So we built that. What we did is we did a, kind of a focus group of like, these top editors of gear publications and asked them like freelancers and said like, hey, what do you want to see in a gear? What is your ideal situation for like reviewing gear? Do you want to do it all online? Do you want to do part of it online? Do you want to, so we did this, this focus group, and unanimously everyone said, no, we still want to see the product in person. We want to touch and feel it, and we want to meet the PR person or the person at the brand. We just don't want to spend like a whole day or 2 days or 3 days walking around aimlessly at a trade show hall in 30-minute meetings, like, these big long meetings when really we could just get this done in like in 10 minutes, which is, and then so they were like, well, we want to spend like 4 hours just like single track focused at looking at the products. And then for the next 4 hours, just single track focus on partying and networking and having a good time, but be super hyper productive. So we built New Gear Speed Date based on that. So I think that goes the same as, retailers. Retailers still want to see product in person. They want to touch and feel it. They don't want to spend 4 days out of the office or 3 days or even a day, like, 2 days out of the office doing it. They want to spend about 4 hours looking at, the best products. They want to look at like 25 brands and like, 2 or 3 products per brand. And then they just want to like, boom, 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 boom. This is what we're going to, do for the year. Okay, sweet. We did this in a chunk of 4 or 5 hours or 6 hours. Cool. We can now focus on gathering. That would be my guess. I'm not a retailer, and I don't have a ton of insight into retailers, but I know media. That's what we found from our focus group.
Interesting. So do you feel like that format will start to take hold? Will that lead to smaller and smaller get-togethers where you're just focused on the businesses and the products that you're interested in as a buyer?
Yeah, that is a great question. So kind of my theory on that whole concept of, I think everyone sees success as being big. The other day, yesterday I had a call and someone was like, oh yeah, if we do this thing, Outdoor Media Summit will become huge. And I was like thinking in my head, like, that's not how I measure success. You go into a room with 50,000 people or 100,000 people or 10,000 people or even 1,000 people, and you have 8 hours, you can still only have 10 quality conversations. It doesn't matter how many people are in that room. You can only walk out of there with a certain number of conversations. So we have this theory. It's built off of a theory that W.L. Gore, the founder of Gore-Tex, it's a pretty well-known leadership and management concept. And there's an author named Malcolm Gladwell. He wrote a book called The Tipping Point. And he talks about it quite a bit in that book, is like once you get over 200 people, the dynamics of your gathering changes. So W.L. Gore was super intentional about keeping his factory under 200 people. Once it got to 300 or 400, there became like in crowds and out crowds and cliques and cool kids and not cool kids and us and them. There's the managements are a bunch of a-holes, and we're like it's like becomes this like dynamic changes. Whereas if you stay within 200, there's this camaraderie, right? Everyone's on the same team. Management and the whatever you want to call it, the associate is like, they're all like in it together. And I really believe that it doesn't matter, like once you get over a certain number, you can't have more conversations. If anything, it waters down the quality of your conversations. So we don't want to be a humongous giant show. We don't want to grow. We just want to have 200 or maybe max like 220 or 230 of the best, smartest minds in one room. And we measure success based on like how good were those conversations. And the bigger you get, the worse those conversations are. So I think a lot of events are like, oh yeah, we need to get bigger. We need to get bigger. We need to get bigger. But the reality is the quality goes down as you get bigger.
But I think what you're reinforcing is this idea that like we thrive in smaller, more intimate environments. And that's exactly what Outdoor Media Summit provides. 200 seems awfully close to, what is that, Dunbar's number, which is 150 people in your life that you can have quality relationships with. That I wonder if there's a correlation there between those two numbers. But I guess that's what kind of my bigger question, which is like, are we going to see more and more like micro niche events, where there's 200 or 500 people versus these events where there's 10,000 showing up?
And I think we already are. I think we have been for a while. It's just hasn't clicked for a lot of people. Like, have you been to a film festival recently, or like have you been to like a outdoor industry happy hour that's regional? I just got invited to one coming up in a couple of weeks by People for Bikes, and then I'll probably be 100 people, and I'll know everyone in the room, and I'll feel it like I belong there. And so I think we have been for a long time, is like these little tiny micro communities, and even like in the press world, there's always been these kind of like little tiny, I shouldn't say tiny, but they're not like humongous, massive, trade shows. They're like these kind of small, kind of PR events. The community is like, people feel like they belong. And so I feel like that's already been happening. I think people are just realizing like, oh, my community is actually, it's like more frequent and it's smaller, but I do belong. I just belong in multiple pockets of communities. Sometimes it's regional outdoor industry based. Sometimes it's like, based on what specific interest field, like if it's a film festival or if it's a volunteer event. So anyway, that's kind of my thought in terms of like, I've just noticed that I've been going to more events, but they're smaller, and they're less demanding, right? They're not like a 4 or 5 day or even a 2-day event. It's like I can go for 4 hours and then be done with it type thing. I still do go to a lot of conferences. Those are usually three days. So anyway, that's kind of my thought on that.
That makes sense. I was recently at a film festival here in town put on by a local company, and it was a mountain bike festival. And, there was, I don't know how many people were in the audience, but maybe, I don't know, 500 to 800. But it was this super tight, super niche audience that all showed up, and they were all local, mostly local filmmakers who had made work. Most of it was all shot on local trails with local athletes. And it was just a really fun time. And because we're all in this, we're all in the same community. And now that you're talking about this, I almost feel like that's almost what the outdoor industry is more about. Like, it's more about those micro events where you're, hanging out with your buddies on the back of your tailgate, talking about, your latest story, rather than going to this massive event where you're walking around for miles in a concrete floor swapping stories. It makes sense that this is the direction that things could be trending.
I would love to see that, communal gathering happen again. I mean, I don't know if it's realistic. If, again, it's a value prop for the customer. If the customer doesn't see the value, which I don't think they, I don't see how they're going to, recreate that value prop. But then again, I mean, you have like things like GoPro games, right? And then like Sea Otter, like we were talking about, and even the whole like Overland series, like that's, from my understanding, that's a B2B2C, type gathering. GoPro games has only gained more people. And so you could say that those are like the big annual gatherings, where like tons and tons of people come out. So anyway, kind of going back to my theory of like at the other side of trade shows is consumer events, and then like micro conferences, and then like micro, like regional regional, super niche events.
So I just thought of this. What about, so obviously an event like OR is changing, and there's the question of value is, well, that is the question of like, what is the value for brands who are showing up? But now I'm thinking about this from outside the industry's perspective. And if I'm not in the industry and I'm wondering who are these folks who are in the outdoor industry? What is it? Is it even an industry? Is there any scale or size or weight behind it? If all I see is 200 mountain bikers showing up at a local film festival, I'd think, oh, those are, who are those dirtbags? But if I am on the outside and I'm in Salt Lake City looking at what's happening at OR, I'm like, oh, that has some serious weight behind it. This is actually a massive portion of our economy. Is what sort of value does a massive gathering like that bring for things like politics, legislation, lobbying efforts, just general communication about our industry to folks not in the industry?
Yeah, so that's a great question. It's something that I think about a lot, which is, what defines an industry? And so the way that I look at it is, and I know that I have a different opinion as like, some of the other folks that have mentored me on like what exactly is an industry, but this is kind of how I like things like a little bit more clear of like, okay, I can define this. So the way that I define what is an industry is if they have a trade association. So they've got a formal C6 that goes to Congress on behalf of that, their constituents, and they, they push legislation based on their members. So effectively they have a lobby. So as long as they have a lobby, in my books, they're an industry. If they don't have a lobby, they're not an industry. I know this doesn't fit into everyone's definition of what an industry is. I think kind of like that term is kind of nebulous. I do think that having that big, gathering, the physical gathering, I think it is, it's huge, and it does help the industries, like their momentum in going to Congress and pushing legislation. But I just don't think you necessarily have to have a physical, humongous gathering. Look at People for Bikes, for example. Like they have done some of the most successful, not just at the federal level, but at the state and local level, like in terms of, building bike trails and building momentum. And it's mostly done through, digital means of like, or like grassroots means of like, getting people organized, but they're not necessarily all coming together under one, you could say Sea Otter, but Sea Otter is not like the industry trade association where they come together and like as a united force go to Congress. It's an event, and there may be elements of, of trade conversations there, but that's not the focus of the event. So, I don't necessarily think that like, for the, in our case, OIA, so our corner of the outdoor industry, their success doesn't necessarily depend on this giant gathering where everyone is under one umbrella, under one physical roof. I still think they can be super successful, but doing it in kind of like distributed, like gathering people in distributed, not physical means, so to speak. So.
You mentioned on our intro call you had a term for super helpful marketing people. What was the phrase you used?
So it's schmo.
Schmo.
Yeah.
Okay.
I didn't invent that term, by the way, but it is. Yeah. Anyway.
Okay.
Yeah.
And that seems so that I guess that's kind of where I want to go next. Is just like do part of the reason that trade shows have they become infiltrated with schmoes, and is that part of the reason why they have kind of lost their core, is because it's become just an opportunity for people to get pitched? And yeah, I guess I'm curious what your perspective is there, because like that's, I guess both of us are schmoes by that definition.
I'm the schmoiest of the schmo.
are we devaluing the industry gathering to some degree?
I would say that if someone did a really deep analysis and they said like, okay, what are the top 3 threats to an industry gathering? And then number one is going to be, well, the customer doesn't have a return. Maybe number 2 is like, I don't know, maybe costs have skyrocketed. But in that list of those things of like why the customer is, not renewing, or, the value has been lost, one of those things is this schmo, which, super helpful marketing organization is what, is like, people like you and me that go booth to booth asking for money. Whenever any event really becomes this kind of like pitch fest, because you got to think of it from the brand's perspective. They're like, oh my gosh, I've had like 10 conversations and 9 of them have nothing to do with helping, or have nothing to do with like, we came here because we want to sell products, and 9 of these conversations is like, these people trying to sell me some shit that I don't want, like, like an SMS service or whatever it is, or like a digital agency like me, or like, another event. These guys are like, why are we even here? Like, we're just here to get pitched, paying all this money. So I think like that, at the same time, like schmoes have like they play a very important part, right? Like, so like nonprofits, that's what they do. They go around asking for money. Like influencers, that's what they do. At the end of the day, media needs to make money. So even, in some way you can say like, well, like, yeah, they're able to produce editorial and, like do a couple things pro bono, but eventually they're going to need some, some advertising revenue. So there's like this fine balance of like, how much, schmoyiness do you let into the show, because you have to have it. It's part of that ecosystem. But when it becomes infiltrated by, it's like 80% of the conversations are that, that's another reason why the value gets lost for the customer.
But you'd put that on number 3 as a threat to events?
Yeah.
So number 1 being loss of value, number 2 just being general cost of the event, and then 3rd just an abundance of schmoes.
So like loss of value would be like, the buyer's not showing up, or the buyer's not, making orders, or right. And I wouldn't put it at like number 1, but it's definitely in that list of top 5 of like, okay, not only, because it's one thing if like the sales team is like crushing it with sales, and half their conversations are like super productive, half their conversations are like someone pitching them, but we still crushed it and we still made our return, right? So it's like, okay, well, that's worth it. But like if they're not doing what they came there to do, and the only thing that's happening is getting pitched, and they're like, okay, why are we here? So I don't think it's like number 1 or maybe number 2, but it might be like number 3 or 4 or something like that. I haven't really thought about like what exactly are those reasons. But I mean, it's, I think everyone kind of knows in the back of their head, like, all right, brands aren't getting the value that they used to. The costs have only gone up. The return is probably only going down.
Do you feel like there's a way that tech could help alleviate some of those problems? How are you seeing tech, or are you seeing tech infiltrating and kind of taking the place of some of the duties of a conventional trade show?
Yeah. So I know that like, I just only know of these projects. I don't know anything about like how they operate, but I think like OR has this thing called Elastic Suite or something or other. And then there's something else from Grassroots that was a similar kind of like B2B online buying platform, which is in some ways it's kind of like cannibalizing to their existing model. But at the same time, it's like, well, if you can't stop the change, which you can't, you might as well get ahead of it and just, move with the disruption. You've already got a step ahead because you're in that space. So I see them being like, all right, we can't change this disruption. This disruption is happening because of forces that we can't control, but at least we can get ahead of it and be a part of what the future is going to look like. So I think those are B2B buying platforms. I don't have any experience in that stuff. So I'm kind of talking over my pay grade at this point, but yeah, I mean, I think a lot of, there'll be a lot more efficiencies with, so like some of the websites that we build, we'll build like a B2B buying platform. So, dealers can log in and place their orders and that sort of thing. So yeah, I think tech and I would say that tech has been a big part of the disruption. It's not even the future. It's like, that's why we're in where we are now, is because of all the advancement in that kind of B2B space.
What about VR? Is that, would anyone, I mean, I know we all want to touch and feel product, but would VR ever take that place?
Man, I don't know. I talk about this a lot with, friends. So when I saw, Apple's VR headset, I was like, oh, okay, well, I could replace my monitors with this, ski goggle. But I mean, who's going to wear this ski goggle and want, like, I don't know. I don't know who this person is. I'm sure there is a lot of these people, right? Apple's a brilliant company, so they designed it for someone. But that person's not me, and it's not anyone else I know. Yeah, I just don't see myself doing this all day long, putting it back on, taking, like this is all set up and ready to go. So anyway, I don't see it. I don't see where like, what's kind of the other, disruptive trend right now, AI. Like AI, I can see like, oh, okay, I see why people are wanting that, and where the vision is and where the future is. But like, it was kind of like whatever you call those, the not crypto, but the
Yeah, Bitcoin.
not Bitcoin, but like the NFTs, like NFTs. I was like, I don't get it. I don't understand it. Like, and same with crypto. I was like, I don't get it. Like, I mean, I get their value prop, but I just don't see it happening. It's kind of like VR. I just like, I don't see it happening. AI, I'm like, I see that happening. People use it every day. I don't know.
Well, Yoon, to kind of wrap us up, so as you're looking forwards to what the future of the Outdoor Media Summit looks like,
Oh yeah.
based on what you're seeing in the industry happening, what things will you guys continue to double down on, and what things will you continue, or what new programs, new ideas are you entertaining to help kind of reimagine what the event space can look like?
Yeah, this is a project that I'm working on right now, and it's probably, I hope it's not too early to talk about it, but I want to because I'm so excited about it, and I don't know if it's going to work out. So you remember how I was kind of talking about like the other side of this disruption with trade shows is consumer events, conferences, and kind of niche, hyper small events. One of the things I see is like every industry association puts on like 2 events. They have their trade show, and then they've got like their really, really small, tiny board meeting of like 10 people or 15 people or whatever it is. I have a small coalition of trade associations in the outdoor space, and I'm really trying to get them to like do their small, hyper small, board meeting at the same time as Outdoor Media Summit, and then have like 15 of those guys all doing it at the same time. And so it's a project that I'm working on. I'm super excited about it. I don't know if it'll work. I probably shouldn't have like gone live with it on air with you, but if there's anyone, I'm going to go live with it, and might as well go live with you. And so I see that being a very fun project. If you think about the potential of that, if you have 10 industry associations, each one of them has 10 CEOs on their board, you get them together, you have 100 CEOs, plus we get like 10 CEOs every year for Outdoor Media Summit. It's not a huge gathering. We're not trying to be a humongous gathering, but it is a significant gathering, a very power-packed one. So it's a project that I'm working on. I'm dubbing this secret mission, I'm calling it CEO Summit. That's the name of it, but it's not actually a thing. It's just a collection of other mini summits. So that's something that I'm kind of doubling down on, and yeah, I would say that's kind of the big project. On the agency side, we're just kind of doing our thing. Like, really what I do is I sell around the preferences of the team. So if the team is like, hey, like we're really into like motion graphic, product videos these days, I'm like, cool. Well, I'll see if I can sell some more of that. If they're like, yeah, I really want to do a Shopify project, I'm like, cool. I'll see if I can find. So there's not really like a clear direction of like we are headed in, to this. I think Outdoor Media Summit, the future of Outdoor Media Summit is, I think we're going to have to change to an invite-only model, to like a true invite-only model, because we don't want to be like, we don't want to be a big show. We want to keep it small, but like we want to vet who comes in through the door and make sure that they match those 2 audiences that we had set out from the beginning. The 2 audiences that want to be in the room together are journalists in the media and brands that work in-house, or marketers that work in-house at brands. So I think we have to like vet at the door a little harder, so to speak, because people are getting in and it's like, shoot, like, now we've got like people in there pitching brands, and like, so I think we're going to transition to a true invite-only model. And yeah, we're not trying to be like the biggest show in the world, but we want to be the best show in the world for 200 people. So yeah, that's kind of the future of OMS.
Amazing. Well, I appreciate you taking the time and sharing some of your insights and forecasting a little bit into the future. Wish you the best with this coming 2023 Outdoor Media Summit. If folks, obviously they can't register for this year's event, but if they're interested in learning more about 2024's event, where can they go to find more?
So website, outdoormediasummit.com. That's going to be the most thorough place. But as we transition into this invite-only model, it's going to be very much like a request for invitation. So if you fit one of those profiles, it's actually 3 profiles technically. So there's, journalists in the media, marketers that work in-house at brands, and then trade associations. So this year we've got People for Bikes and RBFF and OIA and ORR, and I think there's a couple others. So that's kind of like our third audience is that trade association. So if you belong in one of those 3 categories, then it makes sense to request an invite. So you'll do that by going to outdoormediasummit.com. You would basically just email info@outdoormediasummit, request the invite, and then that's kind of how that process will work.
Awesome. And if folks want to get connected with you, where can they find you?
I'm on LinkedIn. That's about it. I don't really check social just because it's kind of my job, and I don't really like keeping up with my personal page. I don't really keep up with my personal LinkedIn either, but I am on LinkedIn. I do check it. And I would say I check email. I've got this 24-hour policy where I try to send a response to an email within 24 hours. So if you hit yoon@outdoormediasummit.com or yoon@outdoorecom.com, I will get back to you. So yeah, that's probably the best way.
Awesome. Well, Yoon, thank you for taking the time. I really appreciate it, and I hope you have a great rest of your day.
Cool. Yeah, thanks.